Tom, I'm really grateful. Thank you very much for all the information you presented today. I know that you're on a tour across Alberta, and so people can be on the lookout for Tom Quiggin going across Alberta, sharing invaluable information. You do not have much good to say about Trudeau. Tell us why.
Well, that's a tough one. My actual personal interest in the situation is radical Islam in Canada, the extremists in Canada, and not just Canada, but in fact around the world. I guess my problem, I would have to say, with Mr. Trudeau is that since he has been elected as a member of Parliament in 2008, he has at every turn supported the Islamist cause in Canada and never actually thrown them under the bus or given them a hard time or defunded them. And even when it's a competition between sort of the Islamist values and the Canadian values, he tends to lean in their direction. One time he actually made an exception to that was when he said he was going to list the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist group. He said that on June 12th of last year, which is to say a year ago, but he hasn't actually done it. So yeah, my problem with Trudeau is that he supports a sort of globalist, Islamist kind of agenda on a number of occasions, and it's a constant worry in the fact that he keeps doing it.
You know, and I think that we're all in agreement with you, and we are very, very alarmed and concerned. You talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, and what do Canadians need to know more about this group and why we should be concerned here in Canada?
Yeah. It is the world's largest, most successful Islamist group. It operates in about 80 or 85 different countries around the world. It promotes a virulent, often violent form of political Islam. And here's where we make the distinction. This is not a problem with Islam. This is not a problem with Muslims. This is a problem with political Islam. The Islamist, in other words, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hizb ut-Tahrir, Al-Qaeda, the Abu Sayyaf group, Boko Haram, those kinds of groups. That's what we have a problem with. Now, are they here in Canada? Yes, they are. The Muslim Brotherhood operates through a number of front groups in Canada. Lorenzo Badino, one of the world's experts on this, testified to the Canadian Senate. There are about 8 to 10 major Muslim Brotherhood groups here in Canada, of which groups like the Muslim Association of Canada, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, and Islamic Relief Canada have been named in Parliament as those front groups.
It's kind of terrifying. Like, you point out what has happened in other areas of the world, Europe, for instance. Do you feel that we need to be a little bit more alarmed about what is going on then here in Canada?
Yeah, I think specifically we need to look at the amount of foreign money coming into Canada to promote a political Islamist agenda. And again, this isn't a problem with Islam, this is a problem with political Islam. So for instance, as I mentioned during the presentation today, the Qatar papers will be released in Canada soon. We've got them. And what it's going to demonstrate is the government of Qatar, one of the world's richest Gulf Arab states, is spending literally millions of dollars in Canada promoting the cause of extremist Islam by building schools, mosques, and cultural centers here.
And this is not, as you say, it's not really an Islam problem or a Muslim problem, because you are actually tipped off by Muslims who are moderate Muslims who are saying, hey, you need to be aware, because some of my best information I've actually gotten from some people, some Muslims who say we need to be concerned about the radicals.
Yeah, guys like Imam Tawhidi, who's probably one of the most famous Muslims in the world, who's dealing with counter-extremism, counter-terrorism. He's actually, one of the first times I met him, he actually looked at me and said, what's wrong with you white people? And I just laughed, and he said, you know, radical Islam's coming into your country, it's coming into Europe, and he says you folks are doing nothing about it. And Muslims, I know, like the folks I work with, the Muslim Reform Movement, Muslims Facing Tomorrow, Imam Tawhidi, all of them say the same thing, like, what is wrong with the West? These folks say they want to destroy you, they say they want to infiltrate you, they say they want to undermine you, and yet you continue to ignore the problem even when the bombs keep going off.
Right.
So yeah, it's a question, it's going, I think, and I hope, I'm being a little optimistic here, other countries in Europe now are just starting to raise the issue. President Macron of France says political Islam is a problem for the country because they want to secede from the Republic. Angela Merkel said it's a problem. The German intelligence services, anti-Semitism is growing because of political Islam. Here in Canada, we've got nothing. No one's talking about it. But I think between now and the fall election, we may actually get this onto the radar, and that's a good thing.
Right, so you want this to be on the radar. You think that our political leaders should be bringing it. Who do you see is the closest to bringing that forward?
No one actually seems to have an agenda so far in discussing it. Justin Trudeau has actually resisted it to the fact that he's going exactly in the opposite direction. Andrew Scheer seems to dance around the problem and doesn't want to address it. Jagmeet Singh, as far as I can tell, nothing. Elizabeth May, nothing. The only exception I see, and even then it's not clear, is Maxime Bernier was asked actually by a female ex-Muslim. He was asked, would you allow Muslim extremists to join your party? And he said something interesting. He said, I don't want extremists of any type in my party.
Right.
And I thought that was fascinating. I thought it would be fun if we could get Justin Trudeau, Andrew Scheer, Maxime Bernier, Jagmeet Singh, and Elizabeth May to stand up and take the pledge and say, I don't want extremists in my party. And I think that would be huge. So anyway.
It would be huge. You talk about the Qatar papers. Is there anything that you could kind of, because that was amazing what you were saying about that.
It's an intelligence leak. An intelligence leak has occurred in Qatar. They are spending Qatar government money through Qatar charity to advance the cause of the Muslim Brotherhood in Germany, France, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Canada, and the United States. Due to my previous connections in my former life, folks asked me would I like a copy of the Qatar papers as they apply only to Canada. So I don't have the French ones and the Belgian ones, but I've got the Qatar papers that apply to Canada. It will show that millions of dollars have been pumped into physical institutions in Canada to promote extremist Islam in Canada. It will show that Canadian politicians have signed letters of support for these organizations to be funded. It will show that the money is also flowing in other organizations like CBC and the Toronto Star, cooperating with Al Jazeera, which is part of the larger overall effort. And Al Jazeera is actually a part of the government of Qatar.
Right.
So anyway, there's going to be some fascinating stuff come out, and it's going to be fun to watch. It hopefully might be out towards the end of June. If not, it'll be out later in the summer.
Right. Well, I thank you for what you're saying. You do have a few things to say about free speech. Just this week, we had a situation where one MP was ordered to basically to apologize and then removed from his position for speaking basically some truth and pointing out some issues. And what do you think of that? That happened in the Conservative Party with Michael Cooper.
Yeah, fascinating situation. A Muslim gentleman was testifying in front of Parliament, and he made an assertion that some people believe that conservative commentators are encouraging violence by talking about the problems like you and I are doing right now. Mr. Cooper, the Member of Parliament from Edmonton, said, look, he said, in New Zealand, the gentleman that shot up the Christchurch mosque, the guy who slaughtered innocent worshippers in a mosque, actually wrote about it ahead of time. And they essentially have accused him around the world of being a right-wing white supremacist. Now it's interesting, if you actually read the document, and the reason they don't want you to read the document, the reason they want it banned, is he actually argues he's a white supremacist. But he also argues that conservatism is a useless movement and it should be buried. That's how he describes it, as a movement that should be buried. So when he's asked, in sort of metaphorically speaking, who do you support, he says he supports Red China. That's the country he's most supporting. So the idea that the argument is conservative commentators are causing the problem, well, it's interesting because this guy admires Red China as the role model we should be following. In fact, he's a hardcore lefty. Is he a white supremacist? Yes. Did he slaughter a bunch of mostly innocent people at a place of worship? Yes, he did. But yet he is a lefty. He is a guy who supports Red China. And I think that was the problem. It's not what Mr. Cooper said, but what the fact is he broke the narrative. The narrative is it is a white right-wing problem. Mr. Cooper's discussion broke that narrative and said he was a white supremacist, but he's a hardcore lefty. And folks don't want to hear that. Now, what I thought particularly fascinating was Mr. Scheer removed him from the Justice Committee for speaking truth, which is kind of interesting. Even if it's an uncomfortable truth, it's something we should be talking about. But more interesting, Parliament as a whole actually took that whole discussion, cut it out of Hansard. The official record of Parliament now has been altered to remove that. And for many folks who didn't read 1984, the most terrifying novel ever, you have to realize that the hero of the story in 1984 is Winston Smith. His job is to cut out newspaper articles and destroy them so people can't read them. So when people say, well, 1984, is it real? The government of Canada has taken Hansard, removed discussions from it so people can't read it, and literally put it down the memory hole, to which I say, wow, 1984 is alive, it's real, it's happening in Ottawa now.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I know that you have to go. I appreciate your time. I'm hoping that a lot of people will find you, and they can also watch and listen to your the Quiggin Report, and you have a podcast.
Yes, if you go into any of the mainstream producers, iTunes, Stitcher, all those sorts of things, it's in there. Just go into Google or whatever and type in Quiggin Report podcast. It'll take you to a number of places and you'll be able to find it there.
Right. And one of the things that you have done as well is you have actually succeeded in getting an RCMP file to report on some of the blatant
I wrote a report along with some of my friends, some of whom are actually Muslim, which is a bit of good fun, saying that the government of Canada, specifically Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Ahmed Hussein, Iqra Khalid, Marie-Claude Bilbao, have actually been taking Canadian government taxpayers' money and sending it down a path which they knew or ought to have known will ultimately wind up in the hands of terrorism. Which is actually a criminal issue here in Canada. You're not allowed to fund terrorism, even if it's indirectly.
Right.
So what we're saying is they've given this money to Islamic Relief Canada, they've given it to Islamic Relief Worldwide, and according to the government of the United Arab Emirates, according to the government of Israel, according to the government of Bangladesh, according to HSBC Bank, according to UBS Bank, Islamic Relief Worldwide, according to all these public sources, is actually taking some of that money and giving it to charitable uses. They're actually helping children and helping flood victims. But they're also taking some of that other money and using it to fund terrorism. So we raised the question with the RCMP and said, is it legit the government of Canada is doing that? They actually have a criminal file open on it, and we'll see where it goes.
Right. Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for standing up for our nation. I do hope that this is a larger issue coming up because we need to protect our land. And some of the things you were saying about the way that Muslims, some of the Islamic beliefs as far as women and gays is very alarming.
Yes, it is. It's quite frightening. I mean, one of the most bizarre things we have in our government is the government's actually been considering, reopening negotiations with Iran, talking to them, maybe opening the embassy again. I'm not sure it's going to happen, whatever. But I mean, if you look at what an Iranian gay pride parade is, they actually take large construction cranes and hang gay people from the parades down the main street in Tehran so we can see what's going on. If you look at their position on women, it is the use of violence to suppress women for not wearing hijab. And this is the same through many countries in the Middle East and Southeast Asia.
And a woman can't drive.
Yeah, so I mean, why is it we insist on dealing with these countries as though they're equal somehow when they're not? Just one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in Canada was the former Premier of Ontario, Ms. Kathleen Wynne, advocates publicly that she's a feminist, but yet there is a picture of her in the press wearing a scarf on her head, barefoot, sitting at the back of the Dundas Street Mosque, whose executive director says is a Muslim Brotherhood institution. She has to sit at the back of the room because the men haven't finished speaking yet. And to me, it's like my premier of any province I live in, if I live in Ontario, if I live in Alberta, I expect the premier of the province to sit at the front of the room, not to sit at the back there. I don't expect the premier to sit there barefoot. And I ask, Canadian feminists, like, where are you when a self-described feminist is sitting at the back room with her head covered and barefoot? This is pre-1930s. If you tried to do that to a woman even in the 1930s, it'd have been an outrage. But now we have it happening, and it's kind of like, wow, where are the feminists?
Right. Thank you for waking Canadians up, Tom. Thank you for showing us what we should be concerned about. Thank you for speaking to leaders about what should be on the table, what we should be looking at. I hope that we all do that. And we have a big election coming up, and I personally stand for Maxime Bernier. I just want to throw that in. But I do thank you for being a nonpartisan person who speaks frankly and truthfully to the Canadian public. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks very much, Laura.
Thank you.